Marcus Johnson was an ambitious 19-year-old from a small town who had spent most of his life dreaming of a future in business. A few months ago, he closed a deal with a tech startup that promised to change everything for him. Today, that deal had earned him a seat on a commercial flight. Not just any flight, but a business-class seat to a high-stakes meeting in New York, where he'd meet some of the biggest names in the industry. He'd never been on a flight like this before. Most of his life had been spent in small towns, walking through the rough streets to work part-time jobs, saving every penny to get ahead. But today was different. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his briefcase neatly placed by his side, holding all the necessary documents for the meeting that would launch his career to new heights. Marcus could already feel the weight of the moment. This was his chance to prove that he belonged at the table with the big players. He boarded the plane, scanning his boarding pass as the gate agent smiled, barely registering his face. He was just another business traveler. He couldn't blame them. To the world, he was just another young man on a flight. But in his mind, this was more than a trip. It was the beginning of a new chapter. As Marcus walked down the aisle of the plane, he found his seat in the first-class cabin. The plush leather seat, the wide window view, and the space around him made him feel like he'd finally arrived. But he quickly realized, as he settled in, that the attention he was getting was less than welcoming. From the front of the cabin, a voice called out, "Sir, this seat is reserved for someone else," a flight attendant said, her tone unusually stern. Marcus looked up, his heart skipping a beat. He double-checked his booking. This was his assigned seat. "Sorry, this is my seat," Marcus responded, trying to keep the calm. But the flight attendant, a tall, white woman with blonde hair, wasn't having it. "No, it's not. I need you to move," she snapped. The situation was escalating faster than Marcus had anticipated. He was caught off guard by her sudden authority, and her unwelcoming attitude made him feel more like a nuisance than a valued customer. As she gestured for him to move, Marcus hesitated. But then, the CEO of the airline, a tall, imposing figure in a well-tailored suit, walked up. The man looked at Marcus, sizing him up in a way that made Marcus feel smaller than ever. "You heard her, right? Move along," the CEO said, his tone dismissive. Marcus could feel the weight of his words, and for a brief moment, the young man hesitated, feeling the sting of humiliation. It was clear to Marcus that the CEO didn't see him as a fellow business person, but as someone who didn't belong in the first-class cabin. "Sir, I'm sorry. I was just trying to sit in my assigned seat," Marcus said, trying to defuse the situation, but his voice faltered as the CEO glared at him. "People like you don't get special privileges here. Now, get out of the seat," the CEO said, his voice dripping with disdain. Marcus stood up, his mind racing. What was happening? Why was he being treated this way? But as he moved, he caught the eyes of other passengers, all watching the scene unfold in silence. Some were shocked, others seemed uncomfortable, and a few stared with judgment. Feeling his heart pounding, Marcus didn't argue further. He moved to the economy class, his pride wounded but still intact. His seat in the back of the plane felt colder, less comfortable, and as he sank into it, he realized that this wasn't just about a seat. This was about something much bigger. The rest of the flight felt like a blur. Marcus tried to bury his anger, his thoughts swirling in frustration. The seat in the back of the plane felt like an iron cage, the walls pressing in on him with every passing minute. He thought about what had just happened. How, in a matter of moments, a simple misunderstanding had turned into a blatant act of discrimination. His fists clenched as he replayed the CEO's cold words in his head. "People like you don't get special privileges here." The flight attendants treated him like an invisible man, and the other passengers avoided eye contact, as though they didn't want to get caught in the middle of something uncomfortable. Marcus sat in silence, wondering if he should speak up or just forget about it and move on. But then, something inside him clicked. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about respect. The way he'd been treated, like he didn't belong, stirred something deeper in him. He realized that this was a bigger battle than just one flight. He wasn't going to let a moment of cruelty define him. He pulled out his phone, tapping out an email. He didn't know it then, but this message would be the turning point of his life. The next morning, Marcus woke up early in his hotel room in New York, feeling strangely calm despite everything. His mind had been working overtime since the flight, thinking of ways to channel his anger into something productive. He had sent that email, the one he never thought would get a reply. He'd written it straight from the heart, outlining his experience, how he'd been humiliated for no reason other than the color of his skin, and how the treatment he'd received was unacceptable, especially coming from someone in a position of power. He didn't expect anything in return, but what came next completely shocked him. Just after breakfast, his phone rang. The caller ID read Airline Corporate Office. He hesitated for a moment, then picked up. "Hello, is this Marcus Johnson?" The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, and oddly familiar. "Yes, this is Marcus," he replied, confused. "This is Thomas Redford, the CEO of Global Airways. I received your email, and we need to talk." Marcus froze. The CEO, the same man who had dismissed him on the flight? "I want to personally apologize for the way you were treated yesterday. What happened was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility. I'm afraid the behavior of my team, especially the flight attendants, was appalling." Marcus blinked. This was not the apology he was expecting. Thomas continued, "I know this situation was upsetting, and I wanted to make things right. Marcus, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I'm stepping down from my position as CEO. Effective immediately." Marcus's mind raced. Was this a joke? "I've been running this company for over 15 years, but my recent decisions and behavior have been questionable. And I'm not the man to lead it anymore," Thomas said. "I want you to consider stepping into my role." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was he being pranked? "I know this might sound crazy," Thomas continued, "but I've seen something in your email. The way you spoke out against injustice, your confidence despite the circumstances, it's rare. I believe someone like you can change this company for the better." Marcus was speechless. "We've already begun the process. A new board of directors is meeting today, and they've agreed with my decision to resign. If you're willing, the role is yours. I believe you can bring a new vision to this company, one where respect and fairness come first." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through his mind. Was he really being offered the position of CEO of Global Airways? Just a day ago, he was a teenager kicked off a flight by the very same man who now wanted to step down and hand over his empire to him. But he couldn't ignore the reality of the offer. Marcus had never considered being a CEO before. He had dreams, big ones, but this wasn't how he envisioned achieving them. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. This was his moment to make a real impact, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been overlooked and mistreated like he had. Thomas Redford, now the former CEO, continued, "I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to understand. The company is at a crossroads. We need someone who can bring change, not just in policy, but in heart. And from your words, I see that you have that potential." Marcus sat back in his chair, his phone still in hand, trying to process everything. He wasn't sure if he was ready. Was he even qualified? What would people say? What would his family think? "Take some time, Marcus," Thomas added gently, sensing his hesitation. "Think it over. But I want you to know that the board has already started the paperwork. If you're on board, we're ready to go." The line went silent, but Marcus couldn't tear his mind away from the question hanging in the air. Should I take the reins of an empire that once rejected me? That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in his mind. Could he really change things for the better? Could he undo the damage caused by an entire company's culture of indifference? The weight of the decision felt crushing. On one hand, he had the opportunity to prove that people like him could rise to the top, breaking barriers and stereotypes that had held back so many. But on the other hand, Marcus wasn't naive. He knew the challenges. The corporate world was ruthless, and being young, black, and inexperienced in running a global airline made him an easy target for ridicule and sabotage. As he lay there, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his best friend, Chris. "Hey man, I saw the news. They really want you to be CEO. You're going to change the game. Don't let fear hold you back. If you don't take this chance, you'll regret it forever. You got this." The message made him pause. He was used to hearing people tell him to go for his dreams, but this was different. This wasn't a small step. This was the biggest leap of his life. He sat up, looking out the window at the city below. There were people out there who felt like he did, marginalized, overlooked, rejected. Maybe this was the opportunity he needed to change things, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been dismissed. By the next morning, Marcus had made his decision. He called Thomas back. "All right, I'm in," he said, his voice steady but full of determination. "I'm ready to lead Global Airways. Let's make some changes." Thomas, who had been waiting anxiously, let out a relieved sigh. "You won't regret this, Marcus. I know you'll do great things. I'll have my team prepare the official announcement, and we'll schedule your first meeting with the board." The enormity of the decision still hit Marcus, but now it was mixed with a sense of purpose. He was no longer the boy who was dismissed for no reason other than his skin color. He was about to step into a role that could reshape the future of an entire company, and maybe even the world. That evening, an official press release was sent out, announcing that Marcus Johnson, a young man who had previously been humiliated by the company's CEO, was now taking the reins as the new CEO of Global Airways. The media exploded with reactions. Some were skeptical, questioning how a 19-year-old with no prior experience in the airline industry could lead such a huge company. But many others were excited. The story of Marcus's rise from being discriminated against to becoming the CEO was inspiring, and it resonated with a generation that felt overlooked. For Marcus, this wasn't just a victory. It was a chance to prove that change was possible, even in the most unlikely places. And now, the real work began. A month had passed since Marcus Johnson took over as CEO of Global Airways. The transition was rocky at first. Many employees were skeptical of a young and proven leader. Some thought he'd only been chosen because of the scandal. But Marcus was determined to prove that he was capable, not just because of his story, but because of his vision. He immediately set out to implement changes, prioritizing diversity in hiring, making customer service a core value, and investing in employee welfare. He was transparent with the media and with his employees, acknowledging his past struggles and how they shaped his mission for the company's future. Despite facing resistance from some corners of the corporate world, Marcus didn't back down. He knew that change wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Slowly, he gained the respect of his team and began seeing positive results: higher employee morale, increased customer satisfaction, and even a boost in company profits. In a final public speech, Marcus addressed the world. "I didn't take this job to make history. I took it to change the future. For myself, for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, and for every person who dreams of a world where the sky isn't the limit." With that, Marcus solidified his place not just as the CEO of a global airline, but as a symbol of resilience, purpose, and the power of breaking barriers. He had turned his painful rejection into a legacy of empowerment for the next generation. And in doing so, Marcus proved that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the greatest destinations.